All right, thank you for being here again. We wanted to continue this conversation that we started before with Selika, Lawton, and David Carlson about the movement that is happening across this country that I, again, am very excited about in my lifetime. I actually feel like this time is different. As long as we continue this conversation and right into the next year when legislators will have to face this change stream that's coming and be a part of it. So I'm going to start with asking Selika to give us a little background again of who you are, Selika, where you come from, and why we're talking to you today.
Hello, I am a full professor of history at UW-Eau Claire. I am the president of Uniting Bridges, which is our race building organization in town. We try to bridge race for all races. I am also the state rep for the American Civil Liberties Union in this area. So I'm the representative from the Chippewa Valley Board to the state of Wisconsin board. And I have been working with the Smart Justice campaign now for about 2 years. I'm also a commissioner on the Eau Claire Police and Fire Commission.
Thank you. And David, give us a little background and why you're here today.
Hi, I'm the Eau Claire County Regional Organizer for the ACLU's Rights for All campaign. So Selika mentioned the Smart Justice campaign. Rights for All is a sister campaign to Smart Justice under the ACLU of Wisconsin. Here today, just because of with my role, and actually starting with COVID-19, looking out for the welfare of underrepresented populations in Wisconsin, specifically in Eau Claire County. And then the murder of George Floyd. I used to live in Minneapolis as a youth, so I had quite a bit of investment in that. A lot of my family is still there. So between those two things that have arisen, just like you said, this movement that's happening now is, for me, it's the first in my lifetime. So we've been going hard on making sure we don't lose momentum in these efforts. I'm a formerly incarcerated individual. I'm also a combat veteran. I served 2 tours in Iraq, and I also have experience with childhood trauma, growing up in impoverished communities until I was adopted. So that's what brings me here today.
Well, David, could you continue on with my first thing I want to start with is tell us your own personal experiences in regards to racism and possible police encounters in Eau Claire and in the region here.
Okay. So it's actually, you had commented on a post that you had, I think you had shared it, about expressing when the first time you had a law enforcement officer point a gun at you, and I actually responded on that. I was 10 the first time that happened. Was in Nebraska, and it was a SWAT team coming in on our vehicle due to something that my stepfather had done. Had stolen a car, a white criminal type stuff though. He was a car dealer, so white collar criminal, I mean. And so the SWAT team swarmed on our entire vehicle, and I had a tactical shotgun put in my face because I had my hands in the pockets of my hoodie. So a lot of times I'll say that I didn't start, as I went on in life and I had altercations with the police, I would say I didn't start this conflict between me and the police started it. And that has been something that I have felt for a long portion of my life. After serving in Iraq, I came out of my youth pretty successfully after being adopted. I had been locked up as a juvenile for a year in Hennepin County, which is the Minneapolis area. And I had made a lot of progress. I served in the military, as I said. I was able to join, did 2 tours in Iraq. After my second tour, was diagnosed with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, but there was just not a lot of treatment available for it. So after about a year and a half of struggling with it myself, I ended up committing offenses, 3 burglaries in one night, drunk. I was just basically addict behavior. And went into the system for just under 5 years myself. So seeing in the system, having been a veteran and having had the experiences that I've had, I was a Sergeant E5 on my second tour, so I had a lot of responsibility in Iraq. So coming into the prison system and seeing the way that people were treated and the empowerment of people was undermined by the system, it was really shocking to me. Even though I had been locked up as a youth, it was very different because as a youth, you expect to be treated like less than a man because you're a child. But as an adult, you don't expect to see that same thing, and that's how you're treated in incarceration. So when I just saw how harmful it was to the progress of individuals who were locked up, there was no way that they were going to be able to maintain not being locked back up because, I mean, you're being demoralized to the point that you're not even considered a human. So when I got out, I felt that, and at the time I didn't know, but taking one of Selika's classes, I actually started studying this, that veterans have a lot of times been the ones that led the movements for empowering underrepresented populations. And that's basically what defined my trajectory coming out of prison in end of 2015.
And Selika, I'm sure you have also encountered racism and the justice system in your lifetime, but particularly in Eau Claire. You've been here for almost 30 years, right? Here in Eau Claire?
Yeah, almost 30 years, which is slightly frightening. Here it has been helping people who have been on the wrong end. I have a coin from the Wisconsin Challenge Academy for my 16-year-old mentee who wound up getting a felony child abuse charge for getting in a fight with a 15-year-old girl over a boy. They gave each other black eyes. And so working with her, we got her record expunged. She's a nurse in Minneapolis now who is getting her business degree and has 2 children and is married. She was black. And we know that children of color tend to be more harshly punished. They tend to be seen as older than they are. Here in Eau Claire, it's been interesting. I stopped running up County C. I used to be a runner because of a couple of incidents of people screaming racial slurs at me. I'm still very careful about riding my bike. I try to keep to the trails. I have had a few in-person ones. My issues with the police have been pretty because I'm a police commissioner in general, I have good relationships with the Eau Claire police. But my husband, who is a black male, has had the police called on him in Chippewa Falls for practicing with his bow stick. He's a black belt in Irwin Park. Here in Eau Claire, I mean, I've taken the next door off of my phone. I'm tired of seeing people threatening to call the police on strange black men in the neighborhood, and that's my husband and son. And we've owned our house for almost 20 years. I've seen an uptick in racism. And I think there's some good police officers here who recognize that, and they don't want to be racist, and they don't want racial profiling. I think the majority want to be good. And but I will say that when I go outside of Eau Claire city limits, I'm nervous. I'm very, very nervous. 2 years ago, I got a ticket for going 1 mile over the speed limit in Black River Falls. And it was the same week the speed limit went from 65 to 70. I mean, so we're talking about here in northern Wisconsin. Uh, I have felt my race less than when I'm in Milwaukee, when I'm in Minneapolis, when I'm in New Orleans in the more segregated spaces. And I think that's because Eau Claire has less segregation. The majority of its segregation in Eau Claire is by class and not by race. But my son has been called the N-word. My daughter has been called the N-word. My husband has had to deal with overt racism. But again, this is from the populace and not just the police. So I
Yeah.
think that when we focus on the police and we miss the schools and we miss the businesses, we miss the fact that this is pervasive. And we miss the fact that people try to weaponize the police with false allegations. Um, and I've seen a lot of that in Eau Claire, people calling the police on people doing nothing. It's less than you see in Milwaukee. In Milwaukee, the Karen thing, as they call it, the barbecue Becky, etc., I think is much more prevalent. But we see that here. We see the stereotyping here.
And
I think we need to get at that.
yeah, I'd agree, Selika. I've lived in and around Eau Claire my whole life, and most of us would say, "Oh, I'm not racist," but I have learned. I learned early on in my adulthood that that's not true. We all have that racism in us through different experiences growing up, or how we've been influenced by our previous generations, or whatever happens, or whatever we see on TV, or all those things. So we all have to admit that, and then try to be sure we aren't influenced ultimately by that when we're faced with situations that that we should not be addressing it that way. So I want to ask David. So how what does systemic racism in Eau Claire County criminal justice system look like? And I think what Selika said about it's not just police, it's a societal thing, and police are, I keep saying, a mirror of society and are out front, and that's where it happens. But so how does racism look like in the criminal justice system in Eau Claire?
That's a great question. So when people think about the police in Eau Claire, so a lot of times you're talking about the city level police department. My experience with them is a lot less than what it is with the county level. The county level is what controls the jail, right? So the sheriff's department. So two different jurisdictions. Then inside the jail, you have corrections officers, which is another capacity. It's not the same. So you have several different levels, and at any one of these levels, this is where discrimination, racism, bias, and abuse occur. So it's very important, one, that people understand that, just like we were talking about, in another episode, defunding, but we're talking about certain areas. We're not talking about the entirety, because we can't explain things by the entirety of the system. So for instance, when we talk about systemic racism in Eau Claire County, let's look at the jail population. We have a 21% African American composition of the jail, right? Even though African Americans only make up 1.2% of the county. The Criminal Justice Collaborating Council has on their website now released data on, well, why African Americans are in the jail now, because of outcries from people like the ACLU and other criminal justice advocacy groups that are saying, why do we have such an overrepresentation of African Americans in the jail? Well, now they're putting it out. So today we had 25% of African Americans in the jail were in on PO holds, right? So criminal reputation, possibly, or just being held on whatever the suspicion the probation officer had, they have the person sitting in jail. 25% of the African Americans in there are on PO holds. We have 18% their secure population. So they committed a new crime and they were sentenced to secure population. We have 13% pending revocation. So pending revocation, once again, can be crimeless revocation, or it can be there was a new charge that the person committed and they're being revoked, but they're waiting to go to prison now, right? And then lastly, you have 9% for felony pretrial. Only 9% are in there for new committed crimes, right? 9% comes out to 1 or 2 individuals that are in there for committing new crimes. So the CJCC put this up as like an explanation of, well, this is why we have no control over it. But yet we don't hear them speaking out about it. Eau Claire County, for instance, if we're going to say, not argue the point that Eau Claire County is not purposely targeting African Americans, well, then we have to take into account that a lot of times people have on their record or are on probation because of charges caught elsewhere that are more likely than not, they have to do with their race. The severity of the charge, possibly the entire reason the person has the charge, the overcharging of African Americans, all of these play into how this person landed in Eau Claire County Jail for what they're in there for. My question would be, who pays for the jail to hold these DOC, Department of Corrections? So either the PO holds or the people that are waiting for revocation. This is Department of Correction jurisdiction. That's state level. So who pays for that? Is it taxpayers, or is the jail getting money? Is the Sheriff's Department getting money from the Department of Correction to house these individuals? Either way, there is an incentive to keep them in the jail. Secondly, COVID-19. Go ahead.
Going ahead, David. I'm sorry.
At the end of March, we started a campaign. Initially, it was just asking for transparency in the COVID-19 care plan. We're met with nothing but resistance to any kind of transparency whatsoever. So after months or weeks, actually at first, of letter writing, email writing, contacts, advocacy work, reaching out, we finally got, on April 8th, we got Captain Brazini to come give it a public announcement. Well, that was arbitrary, because it wasn't until April 21st, when an inspection was done by the health department, that the implementation of proper protective equipment was mandated and then implemented, screening of individuals coming into jail, etc. So all of these things weren't happening. Part of the reason we were so adamant about getting this information is because we have a larger population of African Americans in the jail. COVID-19 has already targeted, or the consequences of it have been experienced more by Black and brown communities. And we're trying to prevent this from happening in Eau Claire County. This resistance to transparency stopped these efforts for the last 3 months. So the furlough that the Sheriff's Department likes to talk about, the people that were released to try to get some kind of social distancing between people that are locked up in the jail right now. The only underrepresentation of African Americans in the criminal justice system is an underrepresentation in the amount of people furloughed. 73% of the population of the Eau Claire County Jail is white. 76% of those furloughed were white. This is consistent across the board, except for with Native Americans also. They're also underrepresented in the furloughed portion. African Americans, 21% of the population is African American total in the jail. Only 14% of that population qualified for furlough. So once again, we have a disproportionate impact of COVID-19, possibly the threat of COVID-19, but then also of African Americans being able to access the different diversion courts, the treatment courts, the different things that can potentially help you get out of the system. They're not able to access them. And so to say that Eau Claire County doesn't have a systemic racist problem, the evidence speaks for itself right on their own website. What they argue is that their intentions aren't to be racist. But I don't see them speaking out against the fact that they've housed between 16 to 21% African American population for the last 4 years. I don't see anybody from the CJC, from the DA's office, or from the Sheriff's Department saying that this is not correct and we need to figure out how to stop this from happening. Not one person has been vocal on that, but I have heard them vocalize that they want to open up the fourth pod. That's an issue.
So I'm going to clarify. I want to make sure I get this right. So of the furloughs, 76% of the 73% were furloughed of the white inmates. Is that correct? Is that what
So
you're-
73% of the total population of the jail
Yeah.
is white.
Yeah.
So that's separate. The total number of furloughs, 76% of the total number of furloughs.
Okay.
So people that were
Total.
let out because of COVID-19
Okay.
was white.
So, do you have anything
can
to add on that, Selika?
Yeah, the one of the biggest things is that here in Wisconsin, and this would be an easy fix for you, anybody who is arrested, it stays on the record even when the record is supposed to be expunged, even if the charges are dropped. And once they're arrested, that really limits their ability to rent, to buy a house, to get credit, to get a job. It doesn't matter if the charge is dropped. And because of the over-policing you see, especially in Milwaukee, people who are more likely to be wrongfully arrested. I mean, and that links to the eyewitness testimony, the Innocence Project, and the other issues that we've been talking about. And if you're wrongfully arrested, but you now have an arrest on your record, you're filling out an employment application, it says, have you ever been arrested? Well, they just drop it. They don't care if the charges were dropped. We need to fix the state system so that if the charges are dropped or if you are not convicted, the arrest is taken off your record. So that, and because of disparate policing and segregation, the 513 area code is both over-policed and under-policed. You see more tickets there, you see more ticket writing there, you see more arrests that get dropped by the DAs and the judges. There was a young black man who was concealed carrying with a concealed carry license 2 weeks ago. His belt slipped and he pulled it back up. Because of that, he was given a charge in Milwaukee of carrying a gun without a license, even though the bystanders, and there's video all over the place of it, were screaming, he has a concealed carry, look in his wallet.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter that the charge was dropped 2 days later. That charge is now on his record, and it creates a cascade of problematic issues. Once you have that happening, it's easier for you to be caught into the system that David describes. Does this make sense? So all it takes is a false arrest, and now you're in the system and you're stuck, and you have been cut off from a lot of the resources that the rest of us have. And that's why we need to think about what these laws are, because to be honest, we have so many petty laws that contradict each other that if the police want to arrest you, they can arrest you for anything. And we need to change that.
Yeah.
We need to absolutely change that.
Sure
We
do.
have overregulated American life. And we have made too many things felonies because of the broken windows theory of the 1980s and 90s. Broken windows didn't work, but it became a really great way to harass people you don't like. And that's what we're seeing in certain area codes. To add on to what David said, about 25% of the Black prisoners are in on crimeless revocations. I want to say maybe 30% they're not even from Eau Claire, they're from surrounding areas. And some of them are from Milwaukee and have been sent here as overflow. But they get counted as Eau Claire citizens by the US Census because of changes in the census in 2010. If I remember,
that is another issue, Selika, that I'd like to get into another conversation about the census counting, and I don't think people really realize how that has come into play as well when it comes to gerrymandering and the way the lines are rigged.
But if they're not citizens of Eau Claire, they aren't allowed certain types of rehabilitation and access to certain types of diversion courts here if they're in the Eau Claire jail. I'll
Mhm.
throw that one back to David because I think he can really describe that a little better in some ways.
Yeah, so that's exactly it. Treatment court, diversion court, anything where the court is looking at giving you some kind of deferred agreement where if you complete some, say, a treatment program or some kind of counseling and you do well for a year, the charges will be either minimized or dropped. That's a deferred agreement type program. African Americans in a lot of cases don't get that because you need a local address to participate in those programs. So then we have a build-up treatment court. So I'm a graduate of Veterans Court, right? The only reason I got into Veterans Court because veteran status is something that is highly looked at throughout the United States. So me being kind of thrown away, like everybody else, like I would have been if I wasn't a veteran, that wasn't acceptable in that case because I'm a veteran. And I understand that. I can acknowledge that. But a lot of other people, I wouldn't have got in there either because I didn't have a local address at that time. So there were allowances made for me. And why aren't these allowances being made for anybody else? Why is it that, okay, if this is somebody else's problem, we're just going to house them, we're just going to perpetuate the cycle of oppression that this person has been living through because they're not our problem? Well, they're in our jail. So it is our problem. And that's something that that this county needs to take responsibility for, at least by starting the conversation. One thing that I wanted to say, people are talking about this community-oriented policing, right? I don't like that term because number one, the agency, Community-Oriented Policing Services, is the agency that has funded the drug war since 1988, I believe. So I like community-controlled policing because community-controlled policing allows us, just like they're trying to do in Eau Claire, it allows a task force or a board to look at what the jails or the sheriff's department or the city police department are doing. And someone like me, I can pick apart certain statistics that they have because I know the operations from the standpoint of having been locked up in their facilities. And that's what we need. If we really want to address this and pick it out, that's something that should be required in every county, is a board that reviews the decisions of the police officers, reviews the data that they take, reviews all of these actions. That would be something that would lead to huge progress if that board was allowed to be filled with people with lived experience, impacted people who knew that weren't going to roll over for the law enforcement establishment.
Now, you've touched on in this conversation, and I don't know how much longer we'll continue this conversation today, but on the differences between populations, whether you're a veteran, like you said, or whether you were white, or whether you're brown, or whether you're Native American, whether you're black. That's what that's what is causing all of this in the first place, is that differences in which people are treated. And I find it, and so my comment specifically about your situation of being a veteran and you were treated differently, is that is a great example of how we think it's patriotic. We got to hands off. We got to treat a veteran differently with respect, and that may be true to some degree, but we really shouldn't be treating anyone differently from anybody else. Period. Wouldn't that truly, in my view, true patriotism, as written in all our forefathers' documentation, whether it be the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution, is that everyone is treated the same. And that's my comment of the day, I believe, is that there shouldn't be any differences between anyone just because of their background or their race or their religion or anything. So that's why we're having this conversation. So one last thing I want to tie the knot here is back to the defunding the police line that we are hearing over and over and over. So what is the ultimate goal then, from what the conversation we've had today and the one we've had previously about this is to bring us back to smart justice as Selika has talked about, and how do we achieve that, and how do we help people get past the defunding the police line and think more broadly about smart justice?
Well, one thing that I wanted to refer back to the last statement, that everybody should be treated equally. You're right. But the problem is we have a predatory law enforcement system right now. So I don't want people to confuse this and say, well, then a veteran shouldn't have gotten that opportunity. I think that everybody should get that opportunity, is what I'm saying. So everybody should be elevated. And I want to be careful there, because if everybody gets treated the same, well, then we're just going to go back to what we were doing, 1980s, 1990s, early 2000s.
And that is what I meant, David. Thank you for for making sure that that was clear.
Defund the police. Once again, it's certain segments of the police apparatus that need to be defunded. Drug war operations, they need to be defunded. One, they get funding from the drugs they seize, which Selika just talked about that, about seizures of people's money, of people's property. A lot of these things go to drug task forces, and that's not counted in the budget. I looked at the county sheriff's budget. I didn't see anything in there telling how much revenue came in from seizures. So that's a huge issue. So everything to do with the war on drugs, even a lot of the situations we've been talking about, the Supreme Court rulings at the state level and federal level have taken place after the beginning of the war on drugs. Our lives are being shaped by the war on drugs. And it can't be emphasized or stated more clearly than that. And that's where we need defunding. We need that element of law enforcement defunded.
Selika?
Agree, but I want to go further. Oops, I'm muted again.
No, now you're fine.
I agree, but I want to go farther, and I want to be more surgical. The reason why I push for smart justice is that the problem doesn't just end with the police. So I don't have a problem with defund the police, but I think that people need to understand that just defunding those areas is not going to solve the problem. We have to go through this entire system and remove the corruption. And we have to remove the corruption at the lower levels, because you can have a leadership that wants one thing, but you can have people who are engaging in petty power tripping at the bottom who are not doing it. So we have to talk about enforcement. And smart justice talks about enforcement, because that's where the worst of this issue is. If we could enforce our professional standards, and not just on the police, and not just in government, in business, in education, in everyday life, we would be in a far better place. So I see smart justice as a starting point for how we get to a world without stereotypes. How do we get to King's beloved community? And that's the way we do that, is by removing this corruption from this entire system. So I agree with David that there are portions of the justice system, not just the police, the justice system, that right now are perversely incentivized. They are perversely incentivized, and those incentives work against citizens' rights. They work against effective law enforcement, and they corruptly put money into people's hands, taxpayer money. We could have lower taxes if we did some of this stuff. We could invest in education if we do some of this stuff. We need to remove all these perverse incentives. And where I would start is with that truth in sentencing law. And I would return discretion to the judges. Where I would start would be moving the police unions into Act 10. And where I would start would be arguing for the Memphis model. Now, David's starting in a little different place, but we both wind up in the same place. You know, we want liberty and justice for all and not liberty and justice for some.
Yes.
And that's, I think, our ultimate goal. One justice system, not two. And right now we have two justice systems. So that's why I say smart justice, because I feel that people can understand smart justice a little more easily. Defund the police triggers a fear reaction that I just don't want to deal with.
Neither do I, Selika, and I appreciate that comment at the end here, because we want everyone to work together towards this. We want everybody from all political perspectives and all walks of life to work together towards that ultimate goal of justice for all. And I want to thank both of you for being here with me for these conversations that we've had, and I want to continue these conversations all the way through till that actually happens, justice for all. Thanks again, David, and thanks, Selika. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for having us.